I was sitting in my car, not driving, but living in it. With $30,000 in debt, 2 maxed-out credit cards, and collection calls every hour, I had officially hit rock bottom at 24 years old. But what happened next completely transformed my financial life. Today, I'm sharing the exact system that took me from sleeping in my car to complete debt freedom in just 18 months, and how you can apply these same principles no matter what financial hole you're in. The warning signs I completely missed. What if your financial collapse has warning signs you're ignoring right now? Looking back at my life before everything fell apart, I realized I was walking straight toward a cliff with my eyes closed. And the scariest part? From the outside, no one would have guessed I was in trouble. At 24, my life looked completely normal, maybe even successful by some standards. I was hustling between 2 jobs, maintaining an active social life, and living what appeared to be the standard young adult lifestyle. Weekends meant meeting friends for drinks. I'd grab takeout whenever cooking felt like too much effort, and I'd treat myself to new clothes or gadgets without much thought. That magical piece of plastic in my wallet seemed to solve any immediate financial need. But beneath this seemingly functional surface, dangerous habits were forming that would eventually bring my financial house of cards crashing down. The truth is, I wasn't just spending carelessly. I was actively avoiding the reality of my situation in ways that now seem like obvious red flags. Every month when credit card statements arrived, I'd glance at the minimum payment amount, and that's all I'd pay. Not only that, I'd congratulate myself for being responsible by making this payment on time. What I didn't understand was that by only making minimum payments, I was signing up to pay sometimes triple the original purchase price through interest. That's $60 dinner out. With minimum payments, it could easily cost $180 over time. Even more alarming was how I'd begun treating my credit cards like a financial shell game. When one card approached its limit, I'd simply start using another. Sometimes I'd even use cash advances from one card to make payments on another. In my mind, this was just managing my finances. In reality, it was a desperate attempt to keep the borrowing cycle going. The emotional aspects of my spending were something I completely overlooked at the time. I'd had a frustrating day at work. A new shirt would make me feel better. Feeling insecure about my apartment compared to my friends' places, I'd buy some new decor to spruce it up. Money had become my emotional band-aid, temporarily covering wounds that required much deeper healing. What's interesting is that income wasn't actually my problem. Between my restaurant job and office position, I was bringing in decent money, more than enough to live on if I'd been careful. The issue was that I had absolutely no system for tracking where it all went. Money came in, money went out, and I operated on vibes and guesses rather than actual numbers. I couldn't have told you within $500 what my monthly expenses were, a knowledge gap that proved catastrophic. I remember the first time my card was declined for a routine purchase, just groceries, nothing extravagant. Instead of seeing this as the flashing warning light it was, I simply muttered something about a bank error, pulled out a different card, and continued shopping. When that started happening more frequently, I just rotated through my cards more strategically, using whichever one I thought might still have available credit. What I didn't grasp then was how quickly small financial decisions compound. Each individual purchase or minimum payment seemed insignificant, just $30 here or $50 there. But like a snowball rolling downhill, these choices were gaining mass and momentum with every passing week. I was creating an avalanche that would eventually bury me. Looking back, the warning signs were screaming at me, but I had become an expert at tuning them out. Beyond the declining cards and minimum payments, there were other red flags I completely missed. My bank account would frequently approach 0 days before payday. I'd started to feel anxiety whenever friends suggested plans that cost money. I was developing elaborate stories about why I couldn't participate in certain activities rather than admitting I was broke. Perhaps the most dangerous sign was my growing reliance on credit for actual necessities. When I first got my credit cards, I told myself they'd only be for emergencies or special purchases. But gradually, they became how I bought groceries, paid for gas, and covered utility bills. When you're using credit for basic survival needs, you're already in the danger zone, but I didn't see it that way. The psychological tricks I played on myself were remarkable. I'd focus only on my income. I make good money at 2 jobs, while completely ignoring the outflow. I'd compare myself to friends who seemed to be in similar financial situations, not realizing many of them had family support or were heading toward their own financial problems. I'd celebrate small windfalls like tax returns without acknowledging that they were merely temporary patches on a sinking ship. One particularly dangerous habit was my complete avoidance of financial education. Whenever articles about personal finance appeared in my feed, I'd quickly scroll past. Conversations about money management with financially stable friends made me uncomfortable, so I'd change the subject. I was actively avoiding the very information that could have helped me avoid disaster. What's frightening in retrospect is how normal everything felt. Financial disaster doesn't always announce itself with dramatic events. More often, it's the slow accumulation of seemingly insignificant decisions. I wasn't splurging on luxury vacations or buying designer clothes. I was just living a normal life without proper financial guardrails, and that was enough to send me spiraling. Most people think they'd recognize the warning signs of impending financial collapse, but my experience taught me that denial is incredibly powerful. I genuinely believed I was being financially responsible because I paid bills on time and held down steady jobs. The gap between my perception and reality grew wider each month until it became an uncrossable canyon. The debt spiral that consumed my life. That uncrossable canyon between perception and reality? It had a name. $30,000 in debt that was growing faster than my 2 jobs could possibly pay down. I kept telling myself I was making progress because I was working constantly, but the brutal math of compound interest was silently sabotaging every payment I made. Despite putting in over 60 hours weekly between my restaurant shifts and office job, the mountain of debt kept growing taller. I'd check my statements and feel a knot in my stomach as the balances climbed higher each month, defying my exhausting work schedule and every extra shift I picked up. It all started innocently enough with what financial experts call good debt. Student loans for a degree program I eventually abandoned. At the time, it seemed like a reasonable investment in my future. Then came a car loan for reliable transportation to my jobs, another seemingly responsible choice. After all, everyone has these kinds of debts, right? But the real trouble began with that first credit card. You know the story. I got it just for emergencies. But my definition of emergency gradually expanded in ways I didn't even notice happening. First, it was a car repair I couldn't cover with cash. Then it became new tires. Soon after, takeout when I was too exhausted from working double shifts became an emergency. New clothes for job interviews? Emergency. Drinks with friends after a brutal week? Also apparently an emergency. What started as occasional use quickly snowballed until I found myself juggling multiple cards, initiating balance transfers, and taking cash advances, creating this complex financial web where I was essentially borrowing from myself. I'd use one card to make minimum payments on another, watching my available credit shrink while my total debt grew. Those missed payments had catastrophic consequences I never anticipated. Credit card interest rates jumped to nearly 22%, a fact I discovered far too late. That's how what started as $10,000 in manageable debt transformed into a $30,000 monster through the ruthless magic of fees and compound interest. The numbers reveal a terrifying reality. Young adults in their early 20s have seen credit card balances increase by about 25% after accounting for inflation, and I was living proof of that statistic. What shocked me most was discovering that about 12.9% of my income was going straight to credit card payments alone, not even touching the principal balance. For someone in their 20s with lower average earnings, this becomes an unsustainable burden that grows heavier each month. The psychological toll matched the financial £1 for pound. Research shows financial stress directly links to feelings of shame and self-doubt, creating a vicious cycle of anxiety and depression, something I experienced firsthand. Studies confirm that 56% of young adults report that money worries significantly impact their mental health. I lived in constant fear of someone discovering my financial secret. I developed elaborate stories to explain why I couldn't join friends for dinner or why I needed to pick up extra shifts. I felt this overwhelming shame that paralyzed me from seeking help. I avoided financial conversations with friends and family, changing subjects whenever money came up. I crafted elaborate lies about why I couldn't afford certain things while pretending everything was fine. I smiled through social events while my mind raced with calculations about which bill I could afford to pay late that month. The worst part, I started working even more hours, believing I could outwork the problem. But the math simply didn't add up anymore. I couldn't earn enough to outpace the growing interest. Each extra shift felt like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon while someone else poured in buckets of water behind me. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one night after working back-to-back shifts, calculator in hand, trying to figure out how many additional hours I would need to work to make a meaningful dent in my debt. The answer was devastating. I would need to work impossible hours just to stay afloat, let alone make progress. The system was designed for me to fail, and I was playing right into it. This reality shattered my perception of how finances worked. I had always believed the narrative that hard work equals financial stability. But here I was, working harder than ever and sinking deeper by the day. The disconnect between effort and outcome was soul-crushing. The misconception about good debt versus bad debt had trapped me. While some financial experts argue certain types of debt, like student loans, can be beneficial when managed properly, potentially leading to asset accumulation and improved credit scores, I had blurred the lines completely. What started as potentially productive borrowing had mushroomed into a consumption-based debt spiral that consumed nearly every dollar I earned. So how did I end up $30,000 in debt while working 2 jobs? Through a toxic combination of student loans I couldn't finish paying, high-interest credit cards that penalized every mistake, cash advances that seemed like solutions but were actually traps, and the crushing power of compound interest that multiplied my missed payments into insurmountable sums. The day everything fell apart. That toxic combination of debt was about to collide with Murphy's Law in a perfect storm that would force me to confront the truth I'd been avoiding. What happens when your car breaks down, your account is overdrawn, and collectors are blowing up your phone, all on the same day? I was about to find out exactly what financial rock bottom feels like when you have absolutely nowhere left to turn. It started on a Tuesday morning that seemed like any other. I remember the clicking sound my car made when I turned the key, that hollow, dead noise that every driver dreads. After 3 more attempts, reality set in. My car wasn't starting, and I had no way to get to either of my jobs. The mechanic's estimate hit me like a punch to the gut. $600 for a new alternator. Might as well have been $6 million. I had exactly $43 in my checking account. All my credit cards were maxed out, and payday was still a week away. For the first time, I experienced what financial experts call financial paralysis. That moment when you literally have no moves left to make. I called in sick to both jobs, knowing full well that missing those shifts meant losing income one desperately needed. The irony wasn't lost on me. I couldn't afford to fix my car to get to work, but I also couldn't afford to miss work because I needed money to fix my car. It was a perfect, terrible circle with no exit. Back in my apartment, I opened my mailbox to find 3 collection notices, one from my credit card company, one from the student loan servicer, and one from a medical bill I'd forgotten about from months earlier. The bold red final notice, stamped across each one, made my stomach twist into knots. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Unknown numbers, one after another, calling relentlessly. I knew exactly who they were, debt collectors working their way through my growing list of unpaid accounts. Each call I declined sent a fresh wave of shame washing over me. The final blow came when I checked my bank account online. Not only was I nowhere near having enough for the car repair, but I was actually overdrawn by $237 from automatic payments I'd forgotten were scheduled. Overdraft fees had already started piling on, adding insult to injury. I remember sitting in my broken-down car, which had become my private crying space, finally doing what I should have done months ago, calculating my total debt. With shaking hands, I made a list of every account, every loan, every overdue payment. The final number, $30,428, still burns in my memory like a brand. Seeing that number written down made it impossible to keep lying to myself about my situation. What I didn't expect were the physical symptoms that accompanied this financial crisis. That night, I experienced my first full-blown panic attack. My heart raced so fast I thought I was having a heart attack. My breathing became shallow, and I felt like I was drowning in air. The chest pains were so severe that my roommate eventually drove me to the emergency room. The doctor explained what was happening. Your body is physically reacting to financial stress before your mind has fully accepted it. Those words hit home. I'd been living in denial for so long that my body had to sound the alarm before my brain would listen. That ER visit, which I obviously couldn't afford, added another $1,200 to my mountain of debt. The sick irony wasn't lost on me. Financial stress had literally made me physically ill, which created more financial stress. It was a vicious cycle that nearly 30% of Americans experience, according to the research I later discovered. The sleepless nights that followed were filled with worst-case scenarios playing on repeat in my mind. Would I lose my apartment next? Would my wages be garnished? Would I ever recover from this? Research shows that over half of young adults report that financial worries significantly impact their mental health. I had become one of those statistics. What was most frightening was realizing that I was just one of millions living on the financial edge. Studies show that nearly 29% of adults report being unable to pay all their bills on time. I joined their ranks in the most catastrophic way possible. My wake-up call came with symptoms so severe they sent me straight to the emergency room. Financial experts call this hitting bottom. That crucial moment that often serves as a catalyst for individuals to finally confront their financial realities. For me, that catalyst was a combination of physical symptoms and the stark reality of having literally nowhere left to turn. The next morning, unable to sleep and still feeling the chest pains, I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I faced the truth. I sat down with every statement, every bill, every notice, and created a complete picture of my financial situation. The transparency was terrifying but necessary. Financial transparency with yourself is what experts identify as the critical first step toward recovery. It's impossible to fix what you refuse to acknowledge. This transparency helped me begin breaking free from the cycle of avoidance and shame that had kept me financially paralyzed for so long. What made this rock-bottom moment different from previous financial struggles was the complete convergence of crises: transportation, income, debt collection, overdrawn accounts, and health issues all colliding at once. Each problem made the others worse, creating a perfect storm that forced me to finally confront reality. The research I later discovered showed that unexpected expenses like car repairs or medical bills are common tipping points that force individuals to face their financial problems. These moments serve as wake-up calls, pushing people to reassess their financial habits. My car breaking down was exactly that catalyst. Living costs had been steadily increasing while my income remained stagnant. Like many young adults who devote nearly 20% of their income to rent, compared to the 7% average for all Americans, I was already financially strained before the crisis hit. This existing pressure made my collapse even more dramatic when it finally came. What I didn't understand yet was that this rock-bottom moment, painful as it was, would become the foundation for rebuilding my entire financial life. Sometimes the only way forward is through complete collapse and reconstruction. My financial house of cards had fallen, but now I could see exactly what I was dealing with. Living in my car, the hidden reality of financial crisis. My financial house of cards had collapsed, but I was about to discover what happens when you can't even afford 4 walls and a roof. The gap between my income and basic survival needs was about to force me into the shadow economy of the hidden homeless. People who work regular jobs while sleeping in their cars, a reality affecting thousands of young adults who spend 20% of their income on rent compared to just 7% for older generations. After borrowing money from a friend to fix my car, I returned to my apartment only to find an eviction notice taped to the door. 3 months behind on rent. I stood there, keys in hand, staring at that piece of paper as the reality of my situation crystallized. My landlord had been patient, but patience has limits. I had 72 hours to vacate. With nowhere to go and no family within 500 miles, I faced an impossible situation. I spent that night sorting through my belongings, making brutal decisions about what to keep and what to abandon. Everything I owned needed to fit into my newly repaired sedan. Furniture, kitchen supplies, most of my clothes, all had to stay behind. By morning, my car was packed with the bare essentials. A few changes of clothes, toiletries, important documents, and a sleeping bag. That first night in my car was surreal. I parked in the back corner of the restaurant where I worked, reasoning that no one would question my vehicle being there overnight. I reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go, wrapped myself in the sleeping bag, and tried to convince myself this was temporary. Sleep came in short, fitful bursts, interrupted by every passing car and distant sound. The next morning brought a new challenge: how to prepare for work while living in a vehicle. I snuck into the restaurant an hour before my shift, using the employee bathroom to wash up as best I could and change into my uniform. Then I stepped onto the floor, greeting customers with a smile as if nothing was wrong. "How's your day going?" they'd ask. "Great, thanks for asking." I'd reply, the lie burning in my throat. The psychological toll was immediate and intense. As I served families enjoying meals together in comfortable surroundings, I couldn't help but think about the contrast with my own situation. The shame was crushing. Here I was working 2 steady jobs, yet I couldn't afford the most basic human need, shelter. Nearly 1 in 3 young adults struggles with housing insecurity despite being employed, but knowing I wasn't alone did little to ease my humiliation. The practical aspects of car living required intricate planning. Finding safe places to park became an obsession. I rotated between the restaurant lot, 24-hour store parking lots, and quiet residential streets where I wouldn't attract attention. I learned which public bathrooms opened earliest and which gym offered the cheapest membership just for shower access. I signed up immediately, creating a morning routine where I'd wake at 5 a.m., drive to the gym to shower and change into office clothes, then head directly to my morning office job. Food became a logistical puzzle. Without refrigeration or cooking facilities, I relied heavily on my employee meals at the restaurant and non-perishable items I could keep in my car. I developed a constant awareness of free food opportunities, office meetings with catering, sample days at grocery stores, community events with refreshments. The most elaborate part of my new life was maintaining appearances. I created a complex web of excuses to explain why friends couldn't come over or why I always needed to meet at their places. My roommate is going through something, or my apartment is being fumigated. Each lie added another layer of isolation. The psychological impacts of hidden homelessness include profound feelings of shame and self-doubt, which began eroding my already fragile mental health. Maintaining my professional appearance for the office job required strategic planning. I kept my work clothes in garment bags hung in the back seat, steaming them in the gym bathroom before important meetings. I rented a small storage unit, $45 monthly that I could barely afford, primarily as a place to organize and swap out clothes as needed. It became my pseudo-closet, the closest thing to a stable physical space I had. Young adults facing financial instability often feel pressured to maintain appearances, leading to increased stress and anxiety. This was certainly true for me. The constant performance was exhausting. Smiling through customer service shifts, projecting confidence in office meetings, all while hiding the reality that I was washing my socks in public restrooms and sleeping in parking lots. The most disorienting aspect was the collision between my daytime and nighttime worlds. One evening, as I was settling in for the night in a quiet corner of a supermarket parking lot, a regular customer from the restaurant walked past my car. I ducked down, heart pounding, waiting for her to pass. The fear of being discovered was paralyzing. Not just embarrassment, but the potential impact on my jobs if co-workers or managers found out my situation. The most painful realization came about 3 weeks into my car living situation. I sat in my vehicle after a double shift, calculator in hand, working through my finances yet again. Even with both jobs, after minimum debt payments, I couldn't afford even the cheapest studio apartment in my area. The gap between minimum wage and housing costs continues to widen in major cities, making it increasingly difficult for young adults to afford basic necessities. My debt had created a perfect trap. I needed to work to pay it off, but couldn't earn enough to both service the debt and maintain housing. In major cities, the cost of living has risen dramatically, with housing costs consuming a disproportionate percentage of young adults' budgets. For me, this wasn't just a statistic anymore, it was my daily reality. My generation was spending nearly 20% of income on rent, almost triple the percentage spent by older adults. This disparity, combined with my debt burden, had pushed me into a category I never thought I'd belong to: the working homeless. The nights were the hardest. After exhausting days of working and maintaining my facade, I'd climb into my car, lock the doors, and often break down in tears. The unfairness of working constantly, yet still not having enough for basics, was soul-crushing. One night, parked behind a strip mall, I watched a family leaving a restaurant, laughing together as they walked to their car. The simple normalcy of their evening felt like viewing a distant world I no longer belonged to. Sleep deprivation became my constant companion. Even on nights when I wasn't awakened by security guards asking me to move along or by nightmares about my situation, The discomfort of sleeping in a car meant I rarely got more than a few hours of broken rest. I'd arrive at my morning office job with dark circles under my eyes, covering them with concealer in the bathroom before anyone could notice. The experience fundamentally shifted my understanding of homelessness. Before, I had the common misconception that homelessness was primarily the result of addiction or mental illness. Now I understood that for many, it was simply mathematics. When housing costs rise while wages stagnate and unexpected expenses or debt enter the turning point, facing my financial truth. Those relentless mathematics of modern poverty kept me trapped in my car until one conversation changed everything. But it wasn't with a financial expert or wealthy mentor. The key to escaping my financial rock bottom turned out to be something I'd been avoiding like the plague: facing the actual numbers. After 3 weeks of sleeping in my car, I finally swallowed my pride and reached out to my college friend Megan. When she offered her couch until you figure things out, I nearly broke down crying from relief. Having a safe place to sleep was life-changing, but it didn't actually solve my financial crisis. I was still avoiding my bank statements, dodging creditor calls, and pretending everything would magically improve. The real turning point came unexpectedly on a rainy Tuesday evening. Megan sat down next to me on the couch with a simple notebook and pen. No fancy budgeting app. No complex spreadsheets. Just blank paper. "We're going to write down every debt you have, every interest rate, and every minimum payment, right now," she said with a gentleness that somehow made it impossible to refuse. My hands literally shook as we created that first comprehensive list. Each number I wrote felt like a confession, each total another weight pressing down on my chest. But something unexpected happened as that page filled up with figures. For the first time in months, I could actually breathe. "This is exposure therapy," Megan explained. "The anxiety builds up because you're avoiding looking at the problem. The only way through is to face it directly." She was right. Seeing my complete financial situation written in black and white was terrifying, but it also gave me something I hadn't had in months: clarity. The monster under the bed is always scarier until you turn on the light and see exactly what you're dealing with. The most surprising revelation wasn't the total amount, which I already knew was around $30,000. It was realizing that nearly 40% of my monthly income was going solely to interest payments, money that wasn't even reducing my principal debt. I was working ridiculous hours just to stay afloat while making zero progress. That realization hit me like a bucket of cold water. For the first time, I stopped seeing my situation as a moral failure and started viewing it as a math problem that needed solving. The shame that had been paralyzing me began to lift as I realized this wasn't about my worth as a person. It was about numbers that weren't working. When you shift your mindset, you open the door to new possibilities for growth and success, Megan said, quoting her financial wellness coach. Those words resonated deeply as my perspective transformed from hopeless shame to practical problem solving. The next day, Megan introduced me to Sarah, a financial counselor at a local nonprofit organization that offered free financial planning services. I was hesitant at first, certain I'd be judged for my mess. Instead, Sarah treated my situation with the clinical objectivity of a doctor examining a broken bone rather than a priest hearing a confession. "You're not the first person to sit in that chair with significant debt, and you certainly won't be the last," she assured me. "The fact that you're here means you've already taken the hardest step." Sarah explained that many people avoid seeking financial help due to shame. In fact, her organization's survey found that 56% of young adults reported feeling too ashamed of their financial struggles to reach out for assistance, the very help that could turn their situations around. Over the course of 2 hours, Sarah patiently explained concepts I'd never properly understood. She broke down interest compounding, showing me exactly how my debt had snowballed so quickly. She calculated my debt-to-income ratio, which explained why I'd been denied for consolidation loans. She differentiated between my secured and unsecured debts, helping me understand which ones posed the greatest risk. Most importantly, Sarah created a realistic repayment plan tailored to my specific situation, not some generic advice from a financial guru who assumed everyone had a six-figure income. We prioritized my debts based on interest rates and built a timeline that wouldn't require me to live on ramen noodles for the next decade. The financial counseling made a measurable difference. According to Sarah, their clients typically experience a 20% increase in financial literacy and a 30% reduction in financial stress after completing their program. I became living proof of those statistics. For the first time in years, I felt something that had been missing from my financial life: control. Not complete control. I couldn't magically erase my debt overnight, but the empowering feeling that comes from understanding your situation and having a concrete plan to improve it. This moment of financial transparency became the foundation for every positive change that followed. It was like finally having an accurate map after wandering lost in the woods. The path forward was still difficult, but at least I could see where I was going. The most powerful shift came in how I viewed myself. Before that night with the notebook, I'd internalized the idea that my financial problems were a reflection of my character, that I was irresponsible, lazy, or simply bad with money. After facing my numbers directly and working with Sarah, I began to separate my financial situation from my identity. I learned that financial struggles often have more to do with systems, education gaps, and circumstances than personal failings. This didn't absolve me of responsibility for my choices, but it allowed me to approach my recovery with self-compassion rather than self-flagellation. In the weeks that followed, I continued the practice of financial transparency. I created a simple dashboard where I tracked my debts, payments, and progress. Each small win, a reduced balance, a negotiated interest rate, an extra payment, became visible evidence that change was possible. The transparency extended to my relationships too. Instead of hiding my situation from friends, I began being honest about my limitations. "I can't afford that right now, but I'd love to meet for a walk instead of dinner," became a regular part of my vocabulary. To my surprise, this honesty strengthened rather than damaged my friendships. Looking back, I realized that financial avoidance had been my most destructive habit. Not the spending itself, not even the debt accumulation, but the refusal to look directly at my situation. It's impossible to fix a problem you won't acknowledge. The 3 mindset shifts that changed everything. With transparency finally achieved in my financial situation, I thought the hardest part was behind me, until my counselor asked a question that stopped me cold. "What do you believe about money at your core?" The answer revealed an invisible prison I'd built around myself long before I ever swiped my first credit card. Numbers and budgets were important, sure. But as we dug deeper during our sessions, it became clear that my financial troubles weren't just about mismanaged dollars and cents. They stemmed from a set of deeply rooted beliefs about money that had been quietly directing my financial decisions for years. Most people focus entirely on the technical aspects of financial recovery, my counselor explained. But 85% of your financial success has nothing to do with how much you earn. It's about how you think about money. This statistic hit me like a revelation. Could my mindset really be more important than my income? We spent several sessions uncovering the hidden beliefs that had been sabotaging me. It turns out I was carrying around financial programming I'd absorbed during childhood, from overhearing stressed parent conversations about bills to subtle messages from our culture about wealth and worth. These beliefs had been operating like background software, directing my financial behavior without my awareness. My counselor helped me identify 3 particularly harmful money mindsets that had been holding me back. Tackling these would become the foundation of my financial transformation. The first toxic belief was that money is scarce and I'll never have enough. This scarcity mindset had me constantly operating from a place of fear and lack. Every financial decision was made from the assumption that there would never be enough, which ironically led to behaviors that created exactly that reality. I'd avoid looking at my finances because I assumed they'd be bad. I'd splurge when I did have money because it won't last anyway. The shift was learning to see money as a renewable resource that flows in and out of my life based on my decisions. Money isn't inherently limited. It responds to how I interact with it. This wasn't some magical manifest abundance thinking, but a practical recognition that my actions directly influenced my financial outcomes. I started practicing this new mindset through simple daily affirmations and evidence collection. Each time I made a wise financial choice, I'd note it as proof that I was capable of creating positive money flow. When I saved $50 by cooking at home or earned extra through an additional shift, I'd recognize it as evidence that money responds to my choices. The second harmful belief was that debt is normal and unavoidable. I'd grown up in a culture where financing everything from education to furniture was just what people do. Audrey Faust, a financial psychologist whose work my counselor shared, emphasizes that shifting one's money mindset from viewing debt as entirely negative to recognizing that some debt can be beneficial is crucial for financial growth. This doesn't mean all debt is good, but rather that debt is simply a tool, neither inherently good nor bad. Like any tool, the outcome depends entirely on how you use it. A hammer can build a house or smash a window. I started evaluating debt based on whether it was building or destroying my future. Student loans for education that increases earning potential? Potentially constructive. Credit card debt for daily takeout? Definitely destructive. This simple framework completely changed how I approached borrowing and eliminated the fatalistic, everyone has debt mentality that had kept me trapped. The third and most powerful mindset shift was separating my financial worth from my personal worth. I'd been subconsciously equating my bank balance with my value as a human being. When my finances were in shambles, I felt like I was fundamentally flawed as a person. According to research discussed in my counseling sessions, this connection between self-worth and financial worth is extremely common. Many individuals equate their financial status with their personal value, which leads to feelings of shame and guilt when facing financial difficulties. Breaking this connection was transformative. My counselor had me create two separate inventories, one of my financial assets/liabilities and another of my personal qualities, skills, and relationships. Seeing them side by side made it clear how ridiculous it was to conflate the two. My kindness, creativity, resilience, and capacity for growth had nothing to do with my credit score or bank balance. Your bank account is just a number, my counselor said, not a measure of your worthiness or character. This simple truth freed me from the paralyzing shame that had prevented me from taking action. These mindset shifts didn't magically erase my debt overnight, but they completely transformed how I approached my financial recovery. Instead of seeing my situation as a punishment for past failures, I began viewing it as an opportunity to build new skills and create a healthier relationship with money. I started approaching my finances with curiosity rather than judgment. Each budget adjustment wasn't a restriction, but an experiment. Each payment wasn't penance, but progress. This perspective made the practical strategies I was implementing actually stick long-term, because I wasn't fighting against deep-seated negative beliefs. Studies shared during my counseling confirmed this approach. Individuals with a positive money mindset are significantly more likely to engage in proactive financial behaviors like budgeting and saving, which leads to long-term financial stability. I was experiencing this firsthand as my new mindset made consistent financial habits much easier to maintain. My counselor introduced me to something called the Money Mindset Challenge, which involved daily reflection exercises to strengthen these new beliefs. I'd spend 5 minutes each morning writing about how my financial decisions aligned with my new understanding of money. These brief reflections helped cement the mindset shifts and prevented me from slipping back into old thought patterns. One particularly powerful exercise was creating a money autobiography, tracing the origins of my financial beliefs through childhood memories and family patterns. I realized that my scarcity mindset came directly from watching my parents constantly stress about bills, even during times when we were objectively doing fine. My belief that debt was normal stemmed from growing up in a household where everything was financed, from cars to Christmas presents. Understanding these origins didn't excuse past mistakes, but it helped me approach change with compassion rather than self-criticism. I wasn't broken. I was simply operating on outdated programming that needed an upgrade. The most surprising aspect of this mindset work was how it affected areas beyond my finances. As I released the belief that my worth was tied to my bank account, I became more confident in relationships and at work. I could admit financial limitations without feeling ashamed. I could celebrate small wins without discounting them. My counselor also helped me recognize how negative perceptions of wealth had been holding me back. I had unconsciously absorbed the belief that wealthy people were inherently selfish or corrupt. Faust notes that these negative perceptions of wealth can create internal conflicts that prevent individuals from achieving financial success. After all, if part of me believed that wealth would make me a bad person, why would I ever allow myself to become financially successful? Redefining what wealth meant to me was liberating. I began seeing financial stability not as greed, but as responsible self-care that allowed me to be more generous and helpful to others. This resolved the internal conflict and removed another invisible barrier to my progress. The simple budgeting system that saved me. My mindset shifts were a great start, but I quickly realized that without a practical system to manage my actual money, I'd be back at square one in no time. Like most people struggling financially, I'd tried those fancy budget spreadsheets and apps that promised to fix everything. But after a week of tracking every penny, I'd get overwhelmed and abandon them completely. What if the most effective budgeting system isn't actually the most complicated one? After several failed attempts with complex budgeting methods, I discovered something that changed everything, a modified version of the 50-30-20 rule. If you're not familiar, this approach typically divides your income into three categories: 50% for needs, 30% for wants, and 20% for savings or debt repayment. It's incredibly simple and effective, especially for budgeting beginners. But here's the problem. With my irregular income from restaurant shifts, I couldn't reliably allocate exactly 50% to needs every month. Some weeks I'd make great tips, other weeks would be painfully slow. My office job provided some stability, but not enough to make traditional budgeting work. I needed something more flexible that wouldn't collapse when my income fluctuated. My breakthrough came when I created what I called my bare minimum budget, the absolute lowest amount I needed monthly for basic survival. This wasn't some aspirational number. It was the rock-bottom figure required to keep a roof over my head, food in my stomach, and the lights on. I calculated it at about 70% of my lowest possible monthly income, creating a safety buffer even during my worst-earning months. The psychology behind my next move proved critical. Rather than trying to track everything in one account where money constantly flowed in and out, I opened 3 separate bank accounts, each with a specific purpose. This wasn't just about organization. It created clear mental boundaries around different types of money. The first account was strictly for essential bills: rent, utilities, phone, and insurance. No exceptions, no borrowing from this account for other purposes. The second account was dedicated solely to debt repayment. This money was as good as spent the moment it entered the account. The third was a small quality of life account for the bare minimum I needed to maintain my sanity: basic groceries and gas to get to work. Every time I got paid from either job, I immediately split my paycheck between these accounts based on predetermined percentages. This removed the need for constant decision-making, which had been my downfall in previous budgeting attempts. The money was allocated before I ever had the chance to spend it impulsively. For my irregular restaurant income, I created an even simpler rule. 80% went directly to debt repayment, and 20% to building my emergency fund until I had 1 month of expenses saved. This approach meant I wasn't constantly recalculating my budget with every fluctuation in income. The percentages stayed the same regardless of the amount. The automation of this system became my secret weapon. I set up automatic transfers that would move money between accounts as soon as my paycheck hit. Studies show that individuals who automate their savings are significantly more likely to reach their financial goals. Not because they have more discipline, but because they remove the opportunity for impulsive decisions. For variable expenses like groceries and household items, I discovered the power of the cash envelope system. Each pay period, I'd withdraw a fixed amount of cash and place it in labeled envelopes. When the grocery envelope was empty, that was it. No more grocery shopping until the next pay period. It sounds strict, but it made overspending physically impossible, which was exactly what I needed. What surprised me most was how this system addressed my psychological relationship with money. With my previous all-in-one account approach, I'd check my balance, see a seemingly healthy number, and feel comfortable spending, not realizing that money was already committed to upcoming bills. The separate accounts created visual clarity about exactly what money was available for what purpose. The digital tools available today make this approach even more powerful. While I started with physical cash envelopes, I eventually migrated to apps that replicated the envelope budgeting method electronically. This gave me the same psychological benefits with added convenience. For someone with variable income, the traditional 50-30-20 rule often needs modification. My version looked more like October 20th, 70 during the toughest months, 70% for absolute necessities, 10% for minimal quality of life, and 20% for debt repayment. During better months, I might shift to 50-10-40, dramatically increasing my debt payments when income allowed. The biggest testament to this system's effectiveness was its sustainability. Unlike previous budgeting attempts that lasted a week or two, this approach stayed with me through the entire 18-month journey to becoming debt-free. Why? Because it was simple enough to maintain even during stressful times and flexible enough to accommodate my irregular income patterns. The real magic happened when these practical tactics combined with my evolving money mindset. The separate accounts reinforced my new belief that money is a tool with specific purposes rather than just an amorphous resource to be depleted. The predetermined percentages supported my understanding that financial decisions could be systematic rather than emotional. Many financial experts recommend complex tracking systems where you monitor every penny, but I found that level of detail actually hindered rather than helped my progress. By focusing on the big picture allocations and automating as much as possible, I removed the emotional and psychological barriers that had previously blocked my financial progress. For the first time, I wasn't fighting against my budget. It was working with me. No more money disappearing mysteriously. No more robbing one financial priority to pay another. And most importantly, no more guessing whether I could afford something. The answer was simple. If it wasn't in the appropriate account or envelope, the answer was no. Breaking the debt chains, my 18-month freedom plan. With my budgeting system finally under control, I faced an even bigger monster. $30,000 of debt threatening to haunt me for decades. Most Americans struggling with debt are using outdated payoff strategies that actually extend their financial prison sentence by years. I needed something different, a plan that would work specifically for my situation. The debt repayment world is full of conflicting advice. Financial gurus argue endlessly about whether to use the avalanche method, targeting highest interest rates first, or the snowball method, paying off smallest balances first for quick wins. Both approaches have merit, but neither felt quite right for my specific circumstances. After hours of research and honest assessment of my financial reality, I created what I call my hybrid freedom plan, a customized strategy that borrowed the best elements from different approaches while adding my own tactical innovations. The first step of my plan shocked me with its effectiveness. I grabbed my phone and simply called each of my creditors. I was terrified. Who wants to admit they're struggling? But I pushed through the anxiety and had honest conversations about my financial situation. The results were incredible. Hi, I've been a customer for 3 years and I'm committed to paying my debt, but I'm facing financial hardship. Is there any way you could lower my interest rate to help me pay this off faster? That simple script changed everything. 4 of my 6 credit card companies agreed to reduce my interest rates, some by as much as 50%. One card dropped from 24% to just 12%, saving me hundreds of dollars monthly without changing my payment amount. Those savings went straight to principal reduction instead of padding bank profits. For the 2 stubborn creditors who wouldn't budge on rates, I got creative. I researched balance transfer offers and strategically moved those high-interest debts to cards offering 0% promotional periods. This gave me 12 to 18 months of interest-free breathing room to make real progress on the principal. The small balance transfer fees, usually 3 to 5%, were nothing compared to the interest I would have paid otherwise. My next decision was controversial but ultimately brilliant. I temporarily slowed my debt repayment to build a $1,000 emergency fund first. This seemed counterintuitive. Why save money when I'm drowning in debt? Because without this safety net, any unexpected expense would force me right back to credit cards, undermining all my progress. That $1,000 buffer saved me countless times during my debt repayment journey. When my water heater leaked, I had cash ready. When I needed antibiotics for an infection, I paid without panic. This emergency fund was like financial insurance that protected my debt repayment plan from life's inevitable surprises. Once my emergency fund was established, I created my debt attack plan. While the avalanche method mathematically makes most sense, I knew I needed psychological wins to stay motivated. So I organized my debts from smallest to largest balance, but made 2 important adjustments. First, I prioritized debts with newly negotiated lower interest rates to maximize the impact of my payments. Second, I targeted debts that affected my daily stress levels most severely, like the credit card I'd used for necessities that caused anxiety every time I shopped for groceries. Every extra dollar I could scrape together went toward my target debt, while I made minimum payments on everything else. Once that first debt was conquered, I rolled that payment into attacking the next debt on my list, creating a growing debt snowball that gained momentum with each victory. The most powerful tool in my arsenal wasn't financial, it was visual. I created a giant debt tracker on my bedroom wall where I could physically color in progress. After each payment, this simple visual representation transformed abstract numbers into tangible progress. Each $1,000 milestone became a celebration. I'd take a photo of my tracker and treat myself to something small but meaningful, like a movie night with friends or a favorite home-cooked meal. Those celebration moments weren't just rewards. They were psychological fuel that kept me going through the toughest stretches. The debt tracker also prevented me from rationalizing small splurges by making my progress, or lack thereof, impossible to ignore. Consistency proved to be my secret weapon in rebuilding my credit score. Even while carrying significant debt, my on-time payment history began influencing my score positively. Within just 3 months of implementing my plan, my score increased by 27 points, even though I'd barely made a dent in the overall debt. I learned that payment history accounts for about 35% of credit scoring models, making it the single most important factor in credit rehabilitation. By never missing a payment date, I set calendar reminders 3 days before each due date. I was rebuilding lender trust month by month. As my credit utilization gradually decreased from over 90% to under 70%, my score continued climbing. This created a positive spiral effect. As my score improved, I qualified for better balance transfer offers and lower interest rates, which accelerated my debt reduction further. The journey wasn't linear. Some months brought unexpected expenses that slowed my progress. During these setbacks, I leaned heavily on my visual tracking system to remind myself how far I'd already come. Instead of giving up, I'd adjust my timeline and keep moving forward. What surprised me most was how quickly consistent action produced visible results. After 6 months, I'd eliminated 2 smaller credit cards completely and negotiated lower rates on the remaining debts. My credit score had climbed nearly 70 points. For the first time, I could see a clear path to becoming debt-free. By month 12, I hit a major milestone. I'd paid off half my total debt. The psychological impact was profound. The impossible suddenly felt inevitable. My emergency fund had grown to $1,500, giving me even more security against sliding backward. The final 6 months of my journey brought an unexpected development. My improved credit score qualified me for a personal debt consolidation loan at 8.9%, dramatically lower than my remaining credit card rates. This single move saved me thousands in interest and simplified my payments to one manageable monthly amount. Throughout this process, I tracked every penny going toward my debt. Each month, I'd calculate my debt freedom date based on my current progress. Watching that date move closer with each payment became my financial North Star, a constant reminder of why I was making sacrifices. The strategies that worked for me might not work identically for everyone. Your creditors might offer different hardship programs, your income stability might vary, or your specific debts might require a different prioritization. The key is creating a customized approach that addresses beyond the numbers, the unexpected life transformation. While I was laser-focused on watching my debt numbers drop, something else was happening that I never anticipated. The secret benefit of fixing your finances isn't just a healthier bank account. It's a complete transformation of your mental well-being, relationships, and even how you show up at work. Remember those initial weeks when I started making consistent progress on my debt? I noticed something strange happening. The constant knot in my stomach, that background hum of anxiety that had become so normal I barely recognized it anymore, started to loosen. At first, the change was subtle. I'd catch myself actually laughing without that immediate pang of guilt afterward. I'd walk through a store without compulsively checking price tags on everything I touched. What I was experiencing wasn't unique. Financial hardship is directly linked to increased symptoms of anxiety and depression. Studies show people in lower income brackets are 1.5 to 3 times more likely to experience mental health issues compared to those in higher income brackets. I was living this statistic without even realizing it. The relationship between money stress and mental health works both ways, creating what researchers call a negative spiral. Financial challenges decrease mental well-being, and poor mental health often leads to worse financial decisions, which creates more financial problems. Breaking this cycle became the unexpected gift of my debt payoff journey. My sleep patterns transformed dramatically. Before tackling my debt, I'd lie awake running calculations in my head, or I'd wake up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat thinking about collection calls. As my financial situation improved, so did my sleep quality. I started waking up refreshed instead of exhausted. The financial nightmares literally stopped. Research confirms this connection. As financial stress decreases, sleep quality significantly improves. What surprised me even more was how my relationships began healing. For years, I'd avoided certain friends because I couldn't afford their activities. I'd make up excuses to skip dinners or weekend trips, which eventually led to fewer invitations. When I finally got honest about my situation and my new financial boundaries, something amazing happened. Most of my friends were incredibly supportive, and many admitted they were struggling with similar issues but had been too embarrassed to say anything. This speaks directly to the research on financial stigma. The shame surrounding money problems often prevents people from seeking help, which only makes mental health issues worse. By opening up about my financial journey, I wasn't just helping myself, I was creating space for others to be honest too. Those transparent conversations strengthened my relationships in ways I never expected. Even my romantic relationship improved. My partner and I had fought constantly about money, but neither of us actually understood the root of the problem. With my new financial clarity, we could have real conversations about our values and goals rather than just arguing about spending. Research shows financial transparency, being able to openly discuss and manage financial situations, is directly linked to healthier relationships and greater satisfaction. My work performance skyrocketed too. Before tackling my debt, I was constantly distracted at work, checking my bank balance or worrying about when I'd get paid. Financial stress had literally impaired my cognitive function. Research confirms this. Financial distress negatively affects productivity and concentration, leading to poorer performance at work. As my financial situation improved, I found myself more present, more creative, and more confident at work. I could focus on projects without the constant background worry about money. I started contributing more in meetings and taking on additional responsibilities. Within 8 months, I received a performance-based promotion at my office job, something that would have been impossible during the height of my financial stress. What I didn't expect was how my perception of myself would fundamentally change. Proving to myself that I could tackle this seemingly impossible problem, $30,000 of debt, restored something I hadn't even realized I'd lost, trust in myself. This self-trust extended far beyond finances. I started believing in my ability to solve other problems, take on new challenges, and create the life I wanted. This connection between financial wellness and overall well-being is backed by research. Individuals classified as financially healthy report significantly higher levels of mental well-being compared to those who are financially vulnerable. Financial health isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about what happens inside your head. The transformation wasn't immediate or linear. Some days were harder than others. But the overall trajectory was clear. As my financial health improved, so did my mental health and vice versa. They reinforced each other in what researchers call a positive spiral. There was a moment, about a year into my debt payoff journey, when I realized how dramatically my life had changed. I was sitting with friends at a coffee shop, fully engaged in conversation, when I had a sudden awareness that I hadn't thought about money once during the entire 2-hour meetup. The constant mental calculations, the worry about whether I could afford this $5 coffee, the shame about my financial situation, it was all gone. I was just present. I never expected that solving my debt problem would transform my sleep, my relationships, my work performance, and my self-perception. But the research confirms what I experienced. Financial wellness is a crucial component of overall well-being. If you're struggling with financial stress right now, please know that the benefits of addressing it go far beyond your bank account. The mental and emotional freedom that comes from taking control of your money is truly priceless. And the positive effects ripple through every aspect of your life. The sustainable system, how I stay financially healthy today. The positive ripple effects of fixing my finances were incredible, but I faced a new enemy once the debt was gone, my own psychology. Ever notice how the habits that get you out of a crisis aren't the same ones that prevent the next one? My sustainable system had to address the emotional triggers hiding beneath my spending habits. Becoming debt-free felt amazing, but I quickly realized I was standing at a dangerous crossroads. Without the intense focus of debt payoff driving my decisions, I could easily slide back into old patterns. The statistics were terrifying. A significant percentage of people who overcome financial hardship end up right back where they started within just a few years. I needed different tools for this new phase of my financial journey. The extreme budgeting that eliminated my debt was effective, but ultimately unsustainable long-term. It was like being on a financial crash diet. Great for quick results, but not something I could maintain forever without rebounding. The first step in creating my sustainable system was identifying my personal financial triggers. Through some honest self-reflection, I pinpointed 3 major culprits behind my previous spending habits: social pressure, work stress, and feelings of deprivation. Each of these emotional states had historically sent me running for my credit card like it was some kind of emotional first aid kit. Social pressure was my biggest weakness. I'd always been the friend who said yes to every dinner invitation, concert, or weekend trip, even when my bank account was screaming no. After digging into the psychology behind this pattern, I realized I associated spending with belonging. The fear of missing out wasn't just about the experience. It was about what saying no might mean for my friendships. My solution: I became the friend who proactively suggests alternatives. Instead of turning down invitations, I started initiating affordable get-togethers. Movie nights at my place replaced expensive theater outings. Potluck dinners substituted for restaurants. Hiking trips stood in for shopping sprees. Not only did this protect my finances, but it actually strengthened my relationships through more meaningful interactions. Work stress was my second trigger. After a particularly rough day at the office, I'd reward myself with unnecessary purchases, new clothes, gadgets, or takeout food. These expenses provided momentary relief, but ultimately created more stress as they chipped away at my financial progress. I created a list of non-financial stress relievers that gave me the same psychological boost without the price tag. A challenging hike in a nearby park, reading a new library book, or calling a friend became my go-to responses when work pressure mounted. I even started a stress journal to track which strategies worked best for different situations. The third trigger, feeling deprived, was perhaps the most insidious. During my debt payoff journey, I'd sometimes go weeks or months without spending on anything beyond absolute necessities. This extreme restriction would eventually lead to binge spending episodes that derailed my progress. The solution was counterintuitive but effective. I built planned flexibility into my budget through a dedicated fun money category. Research confirms this approach works. Experts recommend creating space for enjoyment to prevent the feelings of deprivation that lead to financial relapse. Even when the amount was small, sometimes just $50 a month, having this allocation meant I could make guilt-free purchases that satisfied my need for occasional indulgence without compromising my larger goals. The cornerstone of my sustainable system became what I call my monthly money date. On the first Sunday of each month, I block off 2 hours to review my finances, track progress toward goals, and make necessary adjustments. This isn't the anxiety-inducing statement checking I used to avoid. It's a positive, forward-looking practice that keeps me connected to my financial reality. During these sessions, I review all transactions from the previous month, update my net worth tracker, celebrate wins, no matter how small, and plan for upcoming expenses. The regular schedule ensures small issues never grow into major problems, and the consistent practice has dramatically improved my financial awareness. Research backs up this approach. Studies show individuals who engage in regular financial reviews report higher levels of financial confidence and significantly reduced anxiety about their money situation. This scheduled accountability has become the single most powerful habit in my financial toolkit. Beyond these practical strategies, I had to address the deeper psychological origins of my spending triggers. Many stemmed from childhood experiences and societal conditioning I'd never questioned. Growing up in a household where money was never discussed openly, I'd absorbed the silent message that financial struggles should be hidden, not solved collaboratively. Understanding these roots helped me approach change with compassion rather than judgment. I wasn't just fixing bad habits. I was rewiring deeply ingrained patterns that had been forming since childhood. This perspective made the process feel less like punishment and more like personal growth. Another crucial element of my sustainable system is preemptive planning for financial danger zones. Those predictable situations where I know I'm vulnerable to poor decisions. For instance, I now create separate savings funds for seasonal expenses like holidays and birthdays, removing the last-minute pressure that once led to credit card reliance. I've also learned to recognize the early warning signs of financial stress before they escalate. When I notice myself avoiding checking account balances or feeling reluctant to track expenses, I know it's time to reconnect with my financial goals rather than slide further into avoidance. This proactive approach extends to relationships too. I've had honest conversations with close friends about my financial boundaries, which has eliminated the awkwardness of navigating social situations with different budget constraints. Most were surprisingly supportive once I opened up, and several even admitted to struggling with similar challenges. What makes this system sustainable isn't its perfection, but its flexibility. Unlike rigid budgeting methods that collapse under real-life pressures, this approach bends without breaking. When unexpected expenses arise, as they inevitably do, I can adjust without abandoning the entire framework. The key difference between my current approach and my previous relationship with money is intentionality. Every financial decision now aligns with my values and long-term vision rather than temporary emotional states. This alignment creates a sense of purpose that makes maintaining healthy habits feel meaningful rather than restrictive. From rock bottom to financial freedom, the complete transformation. While aligning my decisions with my values created the foundation for change, would you believe the most shocking transformation happened where I least expected it? The distinction between good debt and bad debt, something nobody ever taught me, completely revolutionized my approach to building wealth. For years after sleeping in my car, my life has transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. The journey didn't just eliminate debt, it completely rebuilt my relationship with money from the ground up. Those desperate days of dodging creditors and washing up in restaurant bathrooms feel like they happened to someone else. My 3-account system still anchors my financial life, but with completely different purposes now. Instead of just separating money for survival, debt payments, and the occasional coffee, these accounts now power my entire financial future. The first account handles essentials like rent and utilities. The second manages short-term goals like a vacation fund and holiday shopping budget. The third, my favorite, is dedicated to long-term wealth building through investments. What amazes me most is my emergency fund, which now contains 6 full months of expenses. During my darkest days, I couldn't imagine saving even $100, let alone enough to cover half a year of living costs. This safety net has transformed my relationship with unexpected expenses. When my refrigerator died last month, it was merely an inconvenience rather than a financial catastrophe. I simply withdrew the funds needed and continued with my day. No panic attacks, no desperate calls to friends, no new debt. The most transformative insight came from understanding the fundamental difference between good debt and bad debt. Good debt is money borrowed strategically to purchase assets that appreciate in value or generate income over time. Think mortgages for properties that build equity, student loans that increase earning potential, or small business loans that create income streams. These debts can actually strengthen your financial position over time, even as you make payments. Bad debt, on the other hand, finances depreciating assets or pure consumption, like credit card balances for restaurant meals, clothing, or electronics. These purchases start losing value immediately while the interest compounds against you. At 22% interest, that designer jacket I bought years ago ultimately cost nearly triple its sticker price and was worth almost nothing by the time I finished paying for it. Had I understood this distinction earlier, I would have approached borrowing completely differently. I could have used limited debt strategically rather than letting it consume my financial future. Now I evaluate potential debt by asking, will this loan build my net worth over time, or will it finance depreciation and consumption? This simple question has revolutionized my borrowing decisions. My credit score has skyrocketed from the low 500s to over 780, opening doors I never thought possible. With this improved creditworthiness, I qualified for a mortgage with an interest rate nearly 3% lower than what I would have received with my previous score. On a 30-year mortgage, this difference will save me over $100,000 in interest, more than 3 times my original debt crisis amount. My improved credit also meant better insurance rates, higher quality credit card rewards, and even favorable treatment on job applications. I still rely on many of the same simple tools from my recovery period, just with upgraded purposes. Cash envelopes now help me manage discretionary spending categories like dining out and entertainment. Not because I'm desperate, but because they help me enjoy these activities without overindulging. Automatic transfers still happen on payday, but now they're building wealth rather than just keeping creditors at bay. My monthly financial reviews have transformed from anxiety-inducing damage control sessions to exciting strategy meetings where I track progress toward meaningful goals. Perhaps most surprisingly, I've maintained these habits even as my income has grown substantially. Many people abandon the financial disciplines that saved them once their situation improves, but I've found these practices more valuable than ever as my numbers get larger. The percentage-based system that once helped me survive now helps me thrive, automatically scaling my savings and investments as my income increases. I've also developed a completely different approach to unexpected windfalls. When I received a performance bonus last year, my first instinct wasn't to celebrate with a shopping spree. Instead, I allocated 10% for immediate enjoyment and distributed the rest between my emergency fund, retirement accounts, and home down payment fund. This balanced approach maintains the joy of financial success while strengthening my long-term position. Financial freedom isn't just about having money. It's about having options, security, and confidence. It's about walking through the grocery store and selecting ingredients based on what you want to cook, not what's on sale. It's about saying yes to a friend's wedding invitation without calculating whether you can afford the gift. It's about making career decisions based on fulfillment and growth potential rather than desperate need for the next paycheck. True financial freedom means different amounts of money for different people. For me, it wasn't about becoming wealthy. It was about creating enough stability and flexibility that money stress no longer dominated my daily thoughts. I found that freedom in having sufficient emergency savings, manageable housing costs, and automated investment contributions that build for the future. The psychological freedom has been even more valuable than the financial gains. I no longer experience that stomach-dropping panic when an unexpected expense arises. I don't lie awake calculating how to stretch my account until payday. I don't avoid looking at my bank balance or screening my calls for fear of collectors. This mental liberation has expanded my capacity for joy, creativity, and connection in every area of life. Looking back, my financial collapse wasn't just about poor money management. It was about a fundamental misunderstanding of how financial systems work. Nobody had taught me the difference between asset-building debt and consumption debt. Nobody explained how credit actually functions or how to leverage it positively. I had to learn these lessons the hard way, through crisis and recovery. Financial literacy shouldn't require hitting rock bottom first. Understanding concepts like good versus bad debt, emergency fund sizing, and strategic investing shouldn't be reserved for business school. Graduates. These fundamental tools should be as common as learning to drive or cook a basic meal. My journey from financial disaster to stability has made me passionate about sharing these insights, especially with young adults who might otherwise follow my earlier path. Today, my relationship with money is defined by intentionality rather than emotion or impulse. Every financial decision aligns with my values and long-term vision. This alignment creates a sense of purpose that makes maintaining healthy habits feel meaningful rather than restrictive. I'm no longer fighting against my financial system. I'm working with it to build the life I actually want. As we wrap up this journey, remember that financial recovery isn't just possible. It's probable when you follow a structured approach. Research shows that 70% of people who commit to a financial recovery plan see significant improvements within just 2 years. Your path forward might look different than mine, but the principles remain the same. The first steps are always the hardest: creating that budget, seeking education, and reaching out for support. These aren't just suggestions. They're proven strategies that improve financial decision-making and reduce stress. What I've learned most is that mindset makes all the difference. As Audrey Faust wisely points out, not all debt is bad. Leveraging debt can help build wealth if managed wisely. This perspective shift transforms financial setbacks from failures into opportunities for growth. No matter how deep your financial hole seems right now, you can climb out. Financial literacy programs exist to help you navigate this journey. Remember, hitting rock bottom doesn't define you. It simply provides the solid foundation